Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced talking about some new data topics, and this is going to be the first of a series of videos we're going to be talking about how to use the tool DBT or Data Build Tool. Okay, so again, this tool is called DBT or Data Build Tool. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually close this, that way we can see the preview. Okay, so that way you can see what I'm running there on the side. Now, bottom line is what DBT Data Build Tool is, it's a tool for helping you automate and orchestrate your essentially your data transformations. Okay, and what we're going to do is in this video we're going to get kind of set up, um, just to set up our environment, which means we're going to set up Dremio locally on our laptop. And we are going to, and again, everything that's you see here that I'm typing in VS Code is going to be available in the repo with all the code for all the videos on this channel, which is in the video description. So we're going to set up Dremio locally on the laptop, and then we are going to configure our DBT profile. Okay, and that's essentially what we're doing today. So again, step one, we are going to set up Dremio. Okay, in order to do that, what we need to do is basically create a Docker compose.yaml. So the Docker, so you need to have Docker installed. So if you don't have Docker installed, head over to docker.com and do that first. But the Docker compose.yaml will allow us to kind of really easily create an environment with software on our laptop that's consistent. Okay, so here I'll put the YAML for that situation. Okay, so I'm going to copy it over here from this page right here. So just that way it's all in one place. Okay. Copy that, put that right over here. Okay, so there's everything you need. As you can see over here, essentially what we're going to have is we're going to have a Nessie catalog. That's going to be where we can catalog our iceberg tables. We're going to have a Minio storage. That's where we store our data files. And we're going to have Dremio. Okay, and basically we're going to show how we can basically use DBT to orchestrate and automate setting up a lot of our data in Dremio. Okay, so essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that same thing. I'm going to create that docker compose.yaml file. Docker compose.yaml. Okay, and I'm going to put that in there. Okay, so there's my docker compose.yaml. Okay, looks like I didn't copy over the V, so let me just make sure I copy over the V there, and then make sure I put that in here as well. Okay. Now, what I can do with the docker compose.yaml, assuming you have Docker installed, so if not, go to docker.com. Okay, what I can do is I can set here and go docker compose up. And what this does, in the same folder that the terminal is in, it's going to look for that docker compose.yaml, read that YAML, that's the syntax that's used for this configuration file, which stands for yet another markup language. And it's going to generate our environment. So it's going to take those Docker images that I specified and then run them based on the specs that I have here, which you are free to change. Docker compose up. Okay, so see now it's creating all those containers. So that's going to get all set up in just a moment. Okay, and that's pretty much all going, but I'm just going to give a minute for all that to kind of get started up. So I'm going to create another terminal. So I'm going to hit here to create another terminal environment. So now I have two terminals, the one running Docker, that's running all my digital environment, and Zush. Okay. Now, here what I'm going to want to do is create a Python environment. Okay, so assuming you have Python on your computer, you can always check if you have Python on your computer by doing -- version. Okay, so I have 3.1112. That's the version I'm currently running. Okay, now what I'm going to do is create an environment by doing Python -m, which means I want to use a module. And the module I want to use is the built-in virtual environment module that creates virtual environments, which is essentially just an isolated Python world. Okay, so that way I can isolate the different libraries I use for different projects into their own little sort of universes. And we can just call it whatever we want, but we generally call it VENV. And that's going to create a folder. So as you see here, I just created a folder called VENV in this folder. Okay. Now, generally, you don't want to push that up to GitHub. So if you're doing version control on these files, you want to make sure that you git ignore it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a .gitignore file just to make sure I ignore that environment. I don't want to push that up to GitHub. So I'm just going to sit here and say, hey, I just don't want to push up this venv file. Okay. Which I should be fine. This should be ignored. I have a global get ignore that should ignore these globally. Okay, but just in case. Okay, cool. So now that I have the virtual environment created, what happens is that in this virtual environment, see there's this bin folder, which stands for binary, and in there, there's a script called activate. That's going to be, it's just a bash script. So it's literally just see this like a terminal script that essentially what it does, it's going to change my terminal so that way this specific terminal instance uses this environment, not my global Python environment. Okay. So then I go in here and I'm going to say, hey, dots the source. That's the command to run that bash script. And then I want to say ./venv/bin/activate. That's the file path to that script. And then I hit enter. And I'll notice that my prompt has changed. So I see venv here. That tells me that I have enabled my Python environment. So now all I have to do is install dbt. So I can just do pip install. Now specifically, there's different dbt packages depending on which tools you're using with dbt. So dbt can be used to automate lots of different data tools. We're going to be focusing on using it with Dremio. So we're going to install the dbt Dremio package. So I'll do pip install dbt Dremio. So that's going to install everything I need. So I'm going to let that do that. I'm going to head back over here. So now everything should be started up. So since I've used the same Docker compose file before, it may be spinning up an environment that I already have that exists. I'll be able to tell as soon as we go to Minio. So Minio should be up. So I should be able to go to localhost 9001. And you should be able to log in with the, it should be, if you're just using the same Docker compose settings that I provided, then it's going to be admin and password as the username. Okay. Yep, this is a fresh environment. Okay, so in this case, see, I have no buckets. So right here, this little section right here is to see what buckets you have. Now, if I want to create buckets, and again, a bucket is just essentially think of it as like a place where you can store stuff. Okay, the simplest thought process. And here's buckets. So what I'm going to do is create a bucket, and I'm going to create a bucket called, I'm going to create two buckets. One called warehouse, and one called lake house. Okay, perfect. Okay, so now I have these two buckets, so that means this just makes it's going to make it easier for me to kind of segregate different data if I want. Okay, so now I can head over to Minio and start connecting everything. Okay, our Nessie server is running, so we just kind of, it's just kind of in the ether, running on port, I forget the exact number. But if I head over to port 9047, so localhost port 9047, okay, because again, localhost is your computer and software can run on different ports on your computer. It's going to ask you to sign up, so I'm just going to sign up. Alex Merced is the username. Okay, I will use, yeah, we'll just use this. I have a lot of emails. Okay, then I'm going to set up a password. And that's going to take me here to the main Dremio screen. So make sure you know your username and password because we will need it when we set up our dbt profile. Okay, so now I'm here. Now I just need to add my sources. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a couple different sources. So in my sources, I am going to use Nessie, which is right here at the top because we're connecting to our Nessie server. I'm going to create one Nessie connection for each bucket that I'd like to store stuff in. So I'm going to create one called warehouse, and the Nessie endpoint, okay, if I go back over here to quick guides, okay, are going to be these settings right over here, and I'll put a link to this. Okay, so I'm going to actually just add this to the README. So for, you know, directions for Dremio setup, I'll just add that to the markdown for easy reference. Okay. But essentially what's going to happen is we're going to want to connect to Nessie, and that's going to be this URL right here, assuming you didn't change the name. If you didn't change anything in the Docker Compose, this should be just exactly as is. So I go back to Dremio. I connect this, because again, I have each container under a different name on the network. So if I go back to the Docker Compose, you'll see that here Nessie is called catalog, Minio is called storage, and Dremio is called Dremio. Okay, so we can generally refer, when those things are talking to each other, they can use that as a way to sort of express the URL because they're theoretically on this other network with each other and they can talk to each other. Okay, so HTTP catalog AP. So basically, catalog 19120. So that's the port that Nessie is running on, and you want to use the API v2 endpoint. Okay, if you were using Spark, you would use v1 if you were connecting to Nessie. Okay, none, no authentication because we're just running the Docker container and we didn't configure any kind of OAuth or anything. Storage, we have to basically, when you connect Nessie, you have to be able to connect to the catalog to discover your tables, but then it needs access to the storage to actually read the files of that table. So here's we're providing the storage credentials or the Minio credentials. So in this case, we're going to say, hey, AWS access key, which is just going to be your Minio username and password. So in this case, actually, that's going to be admin, password. And then here we'll do is put the name of the bucket that we want to be sort of like where this particular source is for. So this will be warehouse/warehouse bucket. No encrypted connection because it's running right from our laptop, so it's not encrypted. And then here we're going to want fs.s3a.path.style.access. We want that to be true. Then we're going to want the fs.s3a endpoint, which is going to be essentially this, but except not Minio, it's going to be storage because that's what I called it in this particular Docker Compose file. And we're going to want Dremio compatibility mode. And these things just allow you to kind of use a S3 compatible storage, these two properties, an S3 compatible storage with Dremio, and this tells Dremio where that storage is. Okay, so that should be everything to configure that source. And that's going to connect. And see, now I have warehouse there. And now I'm going to connect the other bucket. So I'll just literally do the same thing again. We'll call this one Lakehouse. And there we go. Get rid of that quotation mark. Storage, admin, password, /Lakehouse. Okay, yeah, that's gonna be storage 9000. And then Dremio.s3 compat, true. Okay, cool. Then I am going to hit save. And now we have Lakehouse. Okay, so cool. So again, these are going to be my Nessie catalogs, which are also, again, they allow me to track Iceberg tables. And the cool thing about them is that they're portable, so I can take them to other tools. So I can take my Nessie catalog over to like Spark, to like a Presto, to Apache Flink. So that way all these tools can play together and make my Apache Iceberg tables very, very portable. Now, for organizing data in my Dremio software world, we have spaces. Okay, if you're using Dremio Cloud, these would be Arctic catalogs. They essentially serve the same role, but the idea is they are units of organization in our Dremio workspace. Now, in Dremio software, you also get a home space. So this is going to space for your specific user where you can create views, upload files, things like that. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a couple spaces or a single space called DBT practice. Okay, that's going to just be where we do our DBT work. Okay, cool. So that is that. So we're almost done. Actually, what I'm going to do is now we have our environment set up technically. So we'll do is in the next video, we'll actually set up our DBT project. So I'll see you there in that video. I'll see you soon.